My name is Claire Holloway. I am 29 years old, and until last month, I believed the hardest thing I would ever build was a bridge. I was wrong. The hardest thing I ever had to build was myself, after my own family tried to destroy me. I pulled into my driveway just after midnight, after a brutal 2-week inspection project in northern Minnesota. Rain streaked across my windshield, and my entire body ached from exhaustion. I wanted one thing: a hot shower and my own bed. Then my headlights swept across the front lawn. I slammed on the brakes so hard my coffee flew into the passenger seat. There was a giant red "Sold" sign planted in my yard. At first, I honestly thought I had driven to the wrong house. But no. There was the porch swing I built myself. There were the white hydrangeas lining the walkway. There was the blue front door I painted last summer. This was my house. My name was the only name on the deed. I jumped out of the car and ran through the rain. My boots splashed across the driveway as panic climbed into my throat. I shoved my key into the lock. It didn't fit. I stared at it. Then I tried again harder. Nothing. The locks had been changed. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I banged on the door. "Hello?" I shouted. "What the hell is going on?" A few seconds later, the door opened. My stepfather, Stephen Mercer, stood there holding a roll of packing tape. Behind him were cardboard boxes. My books, my dishes, my clothes. Stephen barely looked surprised to see me. In fact, he looked annoyed. "Claire," he sighed, "you're home early." I stared at him. Rainwater dripped from my hair onto the porch. "What is that sign doing on my lawn?" I whispered. Stephen shrugged casually. "We sold it." My stomach dropped. "You what?" "We sold the house," he repeated calmly. "A single woman doesn't need a place this big anyway." The world tilted sideways. I looked past him into my living room and saw my entire life packed into boxes. That was the moment I realized something horrifying. My family hadn't just betrayed me, they had stolen my future, and they thought I was too weak to stop them. People think a house is just wood, concrete, and drywall. For me, it was survival. I grew up moving from apartment to apartment across Wisconsin after my father died. My mother, Patricia, worked double shifts at diners and grocery stores, trying to keep us afloat. Some winters, we barely had heat. Some summers, our electricity got shut off for days because bills piled up faster than she could pay them. I learned very young that nothing felt permanent. Not schools. Not friendships, not safety. Every year we packed our lives into cardboard boxes and started over somewhere smaller, cheaper, louder, worse. When I was 10 years old, I made myself a promise. One day I would own a home nobody could take away from me. That promise became my obsession. While other girls in high school went to football games and parties, I studied calculus and physics. I worked weekends at a hardware store. I skipped vacations. I skipped prom. I earned scholarships and graduated near the top of my class before studying structural engineering at the University of Wisconsin. That was when Stephen Mercer entered our lives. My mother met him during my sophomore year of college. At first, he seemed charming, loud, confident, successful. He wore expensive watches and talked constantly about investments and business opportunities. But it didn't take long for me to notice something underneath the performance. Stephen hated feeling insignificant, especially around women who didn't need him. The first time he visited my dorm room, he looked at my engineering textbooks and laughed. "Structural engineering?" he said. "That's a tough field for a pretty girl." My mother immediately laughed with him, like it was harmless teasing. I forced a smile. That became the pattern for the next decade. Every accomplishment I achieved somehow threatened him. When I landed my first engineering job, Stephen said I was probably hired because companies needed diversity points. When I bought my first car, he asked how long before it got repossessed. When I earned my professional engineering license, he told people I was cute when I tried to sound smart. And every single time, my mother defended him. He's joking, Claire. Don't be sensitive. You know how Stephen is. Eventually, I stopped arguing. I focused on work instead. By 26, I had saved enough for a down payment on a beautiful 3-bedroom house just outside Madison. The day I got the keys, I sat alone in the empty living room and cried. Not because the house was fancy, because it was mine. Mine. The hardwood floors, the backyard deck, the garden beds, the quiet. For the first time in my life, I felt safe. Stephen hated that house immediately. "You're drowning yourself in debt," he warned the day he visited. But I wasn't drowning. I was thriving. I paid every mortgage payment early. I repaired things myself. I built equity. I built stability. And deep down, Stephen couldn't stand it because the little girl he used to mock had built something stronger than him. He just decided to steal it. I stood frozen on the porch while rainwater soaked through my jacket. Stephen stepped aside like he was inviting me into a hotel lobby instead of the home he had stolen from me. "Come inside before you drip everywhere," he muttered. I walked into the house slowly. The smell hit me first. Packing tape, cardboard, dust. My living room looked like the aftermath of a robbery. Half my bookshelves were empty. Framed photos had been stacked against the wall. My kitchen dishes were wrapped in newspaper. Someone had unplugged the lamps. Even the throw blankets from my couch were stuffed into garbage bags. Stephen walked past me carrying another box. "Careful with that," I snapped automatically. He laughed. "Relax, Claire. It's just stuff. Just stuff." I stared at him in disbelief. This man was standing in my house, packing my life into boxes, while acting like I was the unreasonable one. "What do you mean you sold it?" I asked finally. "You can't sell my house." Stephen sighed dramatically, like he was exhausted by my stupidity. "We already did." "No," I said. "No, you didn't. My name is on the deed. We handled the paperwork." "We?" "Your mother and I." My chest tightened. "Where is Mom?" "At the airport." I blinked. "What?" "She's waiting for me," he said casually. "A flight leaves in 3 hours." A horrible feeling crept into my stomach. "Flight to where?" Stephen smiled. "Paris." The word hung in the air like poison. Paris. I looked around my house again. My packed belongings, the sold sign outside, the changed locks. "You sold my house to pay for a vacation?" Stephen rolled his eyes. "It's not a vacation, Claire. It's retirement planning. We sacrificed a lot raising you. We deserve to enjoy life now." I actually laughed, not because it was funny, because my brain could not process the level of insanity standing in front of me. "You deserve to enjoy life?" I repeated. "With my money?" "Our money," Stephen corrected sharply. "No," I snapped. "Not our money. Mine." Stephen's expression darkened instantly. "There you go again," he said. "Always selfish. My career, my house, my future. You've never understood what family means." I stared at him. Family? This man had spent 10 years mocking everything about me. He criticized my career, my appearance, my independence, even the fact that I was single. And now he was lecturing me about family while stealing $500,000 from me. "You had no right," I whispered. Stephen set the box down hard. "You listen to me," he said, stepping closer. "That house was too much for you anyway. 3 bedrooms for 1 woman? Ridiculous. You work all day. You barely date. You don't even use half the rooms." My hands started shaking. "That doesn't matter." "It does matter," he snapped. You women today think independence means shutting people out. Well, that's not how family works. I felt physically sick. This wasn't about money. It wasn't even about the house. It was about control. Stephen hated that I succeeded without him. He hated that I earned more money than he did. He hated that I owned property. He hated that I didn't need his approval anymore. So he took the one thing that made me feel safe. I looked around the room, the pale gray walls I painted myself, the fireplace I restored, the hardwood floors I refinished one plank at a time. Every inch of this house represented years of sacrifice, and Stephen had stolen it while I was away working. When do the new owners move in? I asked quietly. Next week. I felt dizzy. You sold it already? Of course we did, he said impatiently. Do you think real estate transactions happen overnight? My stomach dropped. This had been planned. For weeks. Maybe months. While I was working 12-hour shifts inspecting bridges in freezing weather, Stephen had been preparing to erase my entire life. Where's the money? I asked suddenly. Stephen paused, only for a second, but I saw it, that tiny flicker in his eyes. What money? He asked carefully. The money from the sale. He adjusted his watch. We'll discuss finances later. My voice rose. No, we discuss it now. Stephen's entire tone changed instantly. Cold, sharp, dangerous. Don't start screaming like a child, Claire. I am not a child. Then stop acting like one. I looked at the packed boxes surrounding us, my engineering books, my clothes, my life, and suddenly I realized something horrifying. Stephen truly believed he had won. He thought I would cry, break down, accept it, just like my mother always had. He didn't know me nearly as well as he thought he did. Stephen grabbed his car keys from the kitchen counter. Like this was a completely normal evening. I have to go, he said. Your mother's waiting at the airport. I blocked the doorway. You're not leaving until you explain what you did. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he smirked. That attitude is exactly why you're still alone, Claire. The insult landed exactly where he intended. For years, Stephen had weaponized my independence against me. According to him, my career made me cold. Owning a home made me arrogant. Being single made me incomplete. Tonight, he wanted me emotional, weak. I stepped aside, slowly. Get out, I said quietly. Stephen shrugged into his expensive wool coat. The movers are coming tomorrow morning, he said. You should start deciding what you want to keep. Then he walked past me and deliberately bumped my shoulder on the way out. The front door slammed behind him. A few seconds later, I heard his BMW pull out of the driveway. Silence filled the house. I stood in the middle of my living room, surrounded by boxes, unable to breathe properly. Then I grabbed my phone. Mom. No answer. I called again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. By the sixth call, my hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the phone. I walked into the kitchen and stared at the family photo hanging near the refrigerator. It was taken 2 Christmases ago. Stephen stood in the center, smiling proudly, while my mother leaned against him like he hung the moon. I looked miserable in the picture. I remembered that night now. Stephen had spent dinner making jokes about women engineers. Everyone laughed, except me. My mother told me not to ruin Christmas by being sensitive. The memory made something inside me harden. At 2 in the morning, my phone finally buzzed. A text from my mother. Claire, honey, please stop overreacting. Stephen explained everything. We are boarding now and can't deal with drama tonight. This is for the best. We love you. I stared at the message. Overreacting. They sold my house, and she called it drama. I hit call immediately. This time she answered. Claire, she whispered. Airport announcements echoed in the background. Tell me you didn't know. I said. Silence, heavy silence. Then my mother sighed. Stephen said you'd be upset. Upset. My stomach twisted. You knew. I whispered. Claire, sweetheart, you need to understand. No, I snapped. You need to understand. That house is mine. We're family, she said weakly. That is not an answer. He said the market was unstable, she rushed out. He said selling now was smarter financially. He said you agreed. I almost laughed. You believed that? You believed I would sell the house I worked 10 years for? He said you wanted a fresh start. Oh my God. I sat down hard at the kitchen table. My mother lowered her voice. Stephen has been under so much pressure lately. There it is, I said bitterly. Always Stephen. That's unfair. Unfair? I exploded. He changed the locks on my house. He packed my belongings into boxes. He stole my equity. People nearby must have stared because my mother hissed immediately. Lower your voice. I felt something inside me snap. You care more about strangers at an airport than your daughter being robbed. That's not true. Then prove it. Tell me where the money is. Silence again. Then she said carefully, Stephen handled the financial side. Cold dread spread through my chest. How much did the house sell for? I don't know exactly. Mom. Another pause. $650,000. I closed my eyes. My mortgage balance was around $170,000. That meant nearly $500,000 in equity was gone. My entire future. Where did the money go? I whispered. We needed it, she said suddenly, sounding defensive now. We sacrificed our lives raising you. We deserve happiness too. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You stole from me to fund a vacation to Paris. It's not a vacation, she snapped. We're starting over with my money. You're being selfish again. That word. Selfish. Stephen had trained her well. I stood up so quickly the chair crashed backward. I was working when this happened, I said. I was in Minnesota inspecting bridges while you emptied my life. You're making this ugly. No, I said quietly. You already did. Then I hung up. My entire body felt numb. I looked around the kitchen one more time. The coffee mugs I bought. The curtains I installed. The hardwood floors I refinished myself. Then I noticed something. The drawer to my home office was slightly open. Stephen had been inside my files. A terrible feeling crawled through me. I walked down the hallway slowly and opened the office door. Paperwork covered the desk. Folders, contracts, bank documents. And sitting right on top was a file labeled Home Sale. My hands shook as I opened the folder. Inside were closing documents, bank records, title transfer paperwork, and copies of signatures. My signatures. At least they were supposed to be. I flipped through the pages slowly, trying to breathe. The house had officially sold 3 days earlier. 3 days. While I stood in freezing rain in northern Minnesota inspecting a damaged bridge support, Stephen had been sitting at a closing table, pretending to be me. I stared at the signature line, Claire Holloway. The handwriting looked terrifyingly accurate. The same curve in the C, the same slant in the Y. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed I signed it myself, but I knew exactly where I was that day. I had hotel receipts, work logs, GPS reports from the engineering site. Stephen forged my signature, not impulsively, carefully. Practiced, planned. I turned another page and found the disbursement records. Sale price, $650,000. Mortgage payoff, $171,000. Remaining equity, $479,000. My stomach twisted. Then I saw where the money went. Wire transfer complete. Patricia and Stephen Mercer, joint account. I dropped the papers. The room tilted sideways. $479,000. Gone. My entire savings. My equity. my future, and my mother boarded a plane to Paris with it. I stumbled backward and sat down hard in my desk chair. For a few seconds, I honestly thought I might throw up. Instead, I forced myself to think. Engineering had taught me something important. When structures fail, panic gets people killed. You stabilize first, then investigate. I grabbed my phone and searched my contacts. Ethan Caldwell. We met sophomore year at the University of Wisconsin. He studied law while I studied engineering. We used to spend nights in the library arguing about politics and terrible cafeteria coffee. I hadn't spoken to him in almost a year. It was 3:11 a.m. I texted him anyway. Emergency. I need legal help. Please call me when you wake up. I left the house 20 minutes later. I couldn't stay there another second. Every room felt violated. I threw clothes into a duffel bag, grabbed the folder of documents, and drove until the Madison suburbs disappeared behind me. The motel I found near the interstate smelled like bleach and stale cigarettes. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper, while semi-trucks rumbled outside all night long. I didn't sleep. At 7:14 a.m., my phone rang. Ethan. Claire? His voice sounded groggy. What happened? I swallowed hard. My stepfather sold my house. Silence. What? He forged my signature. He took the money and flew to Paris with my mother. Another long silence. Then his tone changed completely. Sharp. Professional. Alert. Where are you? I gave him the motel address. Bring every document you have, he said immediately. Meet me at my office in 45 minutes. Ethan's office overlooked downtown Madison. Glass walls, dark wood furniture, perfectly organized shelves. I felt wildly out of place carrying my wrinkled duffel bag and sleepless exhaustion into that polished conference room. Ethan looked older than I remembered. Broader shoulders, glasses, expensive navy suit, but his eyes stayed the same, calm, focused, intelligent. He opened the file without wasting time. For nearly 20 minutes, he said almost nothing while reading through the documents. Then he stopped at the forged signature page. That's good, he said quietly. My stomach dropped. What? The forgery, he clarified. It's very good. I felt sick again, but not perfect. He pulled another document from his desk, a waiver I had signed years earlier during a ski trip with friends. Ethan placed both signatures side by side. You see the pressure difference here? He asked. I leaned closer. Barely noticeable, but there. The pen stroke hesitates, Ethan explained. Whoever practiced this got close, but not close enough. It was Stephen. I know. I rubbed my temples. So what happens now? Ethan leaned back slowly. Claire, what your stepfather did isn't just unethical. He tapped the paperwork. This is mortgage fraud. Another tap. Wire fraud. Another. Forgery. Another. Identity theft. His eyes met mine. These are felonies. The word hit me like ice water. Felonies. Prison. Suddenly, this wasn't just a family betrayal anymore. It was criminal. Ethan folded his hands together. And there's something else. What? I ran a quick financial background check on Stephen Mercer this morning. His expression darkened. Claire, your stepfather is broke. I stared at Ethan across the conference table. Broke? I repeated. Ethan turned his laptop toward me. There are liens against him from former business partners. 2 lawsuits for unpaid debts. Multiple delinquent credit accounts. And look at this. He clicked another file. Stephen hasn't paid taxes properly in almost 3 years. I felt cold all over. But he acts rich. Because people like Stephen survive on appearances, Ethan said. Leased cars, credit cards, fake investment deals, smoke and mirrors. I thought about Stephen's expensive watches, his tailored coats, his constant bragging, all fake. "He sold my house because he was desperate," I whispered. Ethan nodded slowly, either desperate or planning to disappear. That sentence sat heavily between us. Disappear. I imagined Stephen drinking expensive wine in Paris while using my money to run from debt collectors, lawsuits, and criminal charges. My stomach turned. What do we do now? Ethan's expression sharpened. We move fast. For the next 4 hours, we built the beginning of a criminal case. I wrote affidavits describing everything Stephen said. I printed my engineering schedules proving I was in Minnesota during the forged signing. I gathered bank records showing none of the sale money entered my accounts. By noon, my head pounded so badly I could barely see straight. But the worst part wasn't the paperwork. It was the humiliation. By the second day, the entire neighborhood knew my house had sold. Small towns survive on gossip. And Stephen had already started telling people his version of the story. According to him, I had overextended myself financially and quietly sold the property because I couldn't afford it anymore. I discovered that lie while standing in the bread aisle at Walmart. "Claire?" I looked up. Brittany Collins stood there, holding a shopping basket. Of course it was Brittany. She dated my high school boyfriend senior year, after he cheated on me. Since then she had treated every interaction like a competition I didn't know we were having. "I heard about your house," she said, loudly. My stomach tightened immediately. "What about it?" Her face filled with fake sympathy. "Oh, honey, don't be embarrassed. The economy is rough right now." I stared at her. "I didn't lose my house because of money." Brittany tilted her head. "That's not what your stepdad told everyone." Heat rushed into my face. "What exactly did he tell everyone?" "That you bought more house than you could afford." She lowered her voice dramatically. Honestly, it was kind of ambitious for a single woman. There it was, the judgment. The assumption that a woman alone couldn't possibly succeed, honestly. "I paid every mortgage payment early," I said sharply. "Sure," Brittany said with a tiny smile. "Well, at least your mom seems happy." "What?" She pulled out her phone immediately. "Her Paris pictures are gorgeous." A terrible feeling spread through my chest. I hadn't checked social media since this nightmare started. Brittany turned the screen toward me. There was my mother, standing beside Stephen underneath the Eiffel Tower, holding champagne glasses, both of them smiling. My mother wore a designer scarf I had never seen before. The caption read, "Finally living the dream. Paris looks good on us. #blessed. #new beginnings." My vision blurred for a second. Another photo. Stephen sitting at an expensive restaurant, grinning beside a giant steak and a bottle of wine worth more than my weekly grocery budget. Another caption. "Hard work pays off." I almost laughed out loud. Hard work. Mine. They were spending my future like tourists in a movie montage, and everyone online celebrated them for it. "You okay?" Brittany asked, pretending concern. I handed her phone back carefully. "I'm fine," but I wasn't fine. I walked out of the store without buying anything. Back in the motel parking lot, I sat inside my car gripping the steering wheel while rain tapped softly against the windshield. Then my phone buzzed. "Stephen." I stared at the message. "Hope you're settling into apartment life, kiddo. Paris is incredible. Your mother bought 3 pairs of designer shoes today. We might extend the trip another week." I kept reading. Honestly, this move was the best thing for everyone. "You'll thank me eventually." I realized something then. Stephen wanted a reaction. He wanted me screaming, crying, begging. That was how he controlled people, through emotion. I opened the keyboard slowly, then stopped. Ethan's words echoed in my head. People like Stephen survive on appearances. No, I wasn't giving him what he wanted anymore. I deleted my response completely. For the first time in my life, I chose silence, and somehow that silence felt more dangerous than screaming ever could. 3 days after I stopped responding to Stephen's messages, Ethan introduced me to the man who would eventually destroy my stepfather's entire fake empire, Walter Mercer, Stephen's older brother. If Stephen was loud and theatrical, Walter was the complete opposite. Quiet, precise, emotionless. He wore plain gray sweaters and drove a 12-year-old Honda with cracked leather seats. But according to Ethan, Walter was one of the best forensic accountants in Wisconsin. And unlike the rest of the Mercer family, Walter hated Stephen. He called me 2 months ago asking for money, Walter said during our first meeting. We sat inside Ethan's conference room surrounded by stacks of documents and empty coffee cups. I said no. Did he tell you why he needed it? I asked. Walter adjusted his glasses. Stephen never tells the truth directly. He claimed he was restructuring debt. That means drowning, Ethan muttered. Walter nodded once. Yes. He opened his laptop and pulled up bank records Ethan had subpoenaed that morning. What you're looking at, Walter explained calmly, is not desperation anymore. He tapped the screen. It's organized fraud. A chill crawled down my spine. Walter highlighted a wire transfer, $479,000, transferred into Patricia and Stephen Mercer joint account. That's your equity from the house sale, he said. Then another transfer appeared. $200,000 moved into an account under the name Silver Ridge Holdings, LLC. What is that? I asked. A shell company, Ethan answered immediately. Walter nodded again. Registered in Nevada 6 months ago. I stared at the screen. Stephen had planned this, not days ago, not weeks ago, months ago. He intended to hide the money, I whispered. Walter looked at me carefully. No, he intended to disappear with it. The room fell silent. Ethan leaned forward. Can you trace the accounts? Walter gave the faintest smile. That's what I do. For the next week, my life became split into 2 worlds. During the day, I worked as an engineer, pretending my life wasn't collapsing. At night, I sat in Ethan's office, helping build a criminal case against my own family. The deeper Walter dug, the uglier everything became. Stephen hadn't filed legitimate business taxes in years. He had taken out private loans under fake revenue projections. He forged my mother's signature on multiple financial documents. And worst of all, this wasn't the first time. He's done smaller versions of this before, Walter explained one night while scrolling through spreadsheets. Friends, investors, business partners. He manipulates people emotionally until they trust him. Then he steals from them, I said quietly. Walter looked at me. Yes. I sat back in my chair, feeling sick. I wasn't special. I was simply the biggest target he ever found. Then Walter uncovered something strange. There's another property payment, he said. What kind of payment? Storage unit. Ethan immediately looked up. Where? Outside Madison. Paid in cash every month. My pulse quickened. What's inside? Walter shook his head. No idea. But the account is under Patricia's name. Ethan's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Interesting. The next afternoon, I drove to the storage facility alone. Rain clouds hung low over the highway as I pulled into rows of metal garage doors. The manager was an older man with nicotine-stained fingers and kind eyes. I'm here about Patricia Mercer's unit, I said carefully. She's overseas right now and missed a payment. The man checked his computer. Yeah, unit 404. She's late. I handed him my debit card immediately. I'll pay it. 5 minutes later, he smiled gratefully. All set. I hesitated. She told me there were some family boxes inside, but I forgot the access code. The manager chuckled. Happens all the time. He typed something into the system. Codes 1987. My birth year. Of course Stephen used my birth year. The irony almost made me laugh. I walked down the long hallway until I found Unit 404. My hands trembled as I punched in the numbers. The metal door rolled upward slowly. At first, I only saw boxes, then filing cabinets, then stacks of binders, and finally, a large black safe sitting in the back corner. My pulse exploded. This wasn't storage. It was an archive, a hidden financial graveyard. I stepped inside carefully and opened the nearest box. Bank statements, contracts, loan applications, wire transfers, names I didn't recognize, amounts in the tens of thousands. Fraud. Years of it. My phone shook in my hand as I called Ethan. "You need to get here," I whispered. "What happened?" I found Stephen's entire paper trail. Silence. Then Ethan spoke quietly. "Don't touch anything else." Too late. Because at that exact moment, I noticed one final thing sitting on top of the safe. A passport folder, and inside it, copies of international banking documents with Stephen's signature all over them. The moment Ethan saw the documents from the storage unit, everything accelerated. "This is bigger than we thought," he said quietly. We sat in his office at nearly midnight while Walter organized evidence into neat stacks across the conference table. Foreign banking records, hidden accounts, fraudulent loan agreements, forged signatures, years of financial crimes. Walter adjusted his glasses as he studied another folder. "Stephen wasn't just stealing from Claire," he said. "He's been operating small scams for years. Friends, investors, contractors, anyone dumb enough to trust him. He always thought he was smarter than everyone else," I muttered. Ethan looked at me carefully. "That arrogance is what's going to bury him." Over the next several days, the district attorney's office became heavily involved. Detectives moved in and out of Ethan's office constantly collecting evidence. One of them, Detective Aaron Hayes, was blunt from the beginning. "Your stepfather is a flight risk," he said, "especially now that we know he has overseas banking connections." He pointed to the international account documents. "If Stephen suspects we're investigating him, he may disappear permanently." "So what do we do?" I asked. Hayes leaned back in his chair. "We let him think he won." That became the strategy. Silence. No emotional texts. No public accusations. No confrontation. Stephen needed to feel safe. Comfortable people make mistakes. For the first time in my life, I understood the power of restraint. I returned to work every morning, pretending everything was normal. At the engineering firm, people whispered when I walked past. Some coworkers looked sympathetic. Others looked curious. Rumors had spread everywhere now. Claire lost her house. Claire made bad investments. Claire got foreclosed on. Stephen's lies traveled fast. I stopped correcting people. At lunch, I sat alone, reviewing bridge calculations, while coworkers pretended not to stare. Oddly enough, work became the only stable thing left in my life. Steel beams, load distribution, mathematics. Numbers made sense. People didn't. One rainy Thursday evening, my phone buzzed while I sat in Ethan's office reviewing bank transfers. "Mom." I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. "Hello?" Patricia sounded cheerful, far too cheerful. "Claire, good news. We're coming home Tuesday." Home. The word nearly made me laugh. "You mean Madison?" "Of course." She paused awkwardly. "I know things got emotional before we left." Emotional. Right. Not criminal. Not fraudulent. Just emotional. "Stephen feels terrible about the misunderstanding," she continued carefully. "He's willing to forgive your outburst." I looked slowly at Ethan across the table. He raised one eyebrow immediately. "Forgive me." The audacity was almost impressive. "That's generous of him," I said flatly. Patricia brightened immediately. mistaking my calmness for surrender. We thought maybe we could all have dinner Tuesday night and move forward as a family. A family. The same family, currently building a federal fraud case against each other. When does your flight land? I asked. 4 p.m. Ethan quietly picked up a pen and wrote on a legal pad. Stall them. I looked back at the phone. Dinner sounds fine. Patricia exhaled in relief. Oh, thank God. Stephen said you just needed time to cool off. I closed my eyes briefly. Stephen really believed he controlled the narrative completely. That was his fatal flaw. He thought everyone else was emotionally weaker than him. We'll see you Tuesday, I said calmly. The second the call ended, Ethan leaned forward. That's perfect. What happens Tuesday? Ethan exchanged a look with Detective Hayes, who stood near the doorway reviewing paperwork. Hayes smiled slightly. We freeze everything. My pulse quickened. Everything? Bank accounts, credit cards, business accounts, asset transfers. Walter nodded approvingly. We've already traced enough financial movement to justify emergency restrictions. And Stephen won't know until he lands, Ethan added. The room suddenly felt electric. Real. This wasn't theory anymore. This was the beginning of consequences. Over the next 4 days, the trap closed quietly around Stephen Mercer. Court filings moved through the system. Warrants were prepared. Financial institutions were notified confidentially, and Stephen remained completely oblivious. Meanwhile, his texts became increasingly smug. Paris is amazing. Thinking about extending the trip. Your mother bought another designer bag today. I never responded. That silence bothered him more than anger ever would have. By Monday night, Detective Hayes called with the final update. We're ready. I barely slept. Tuesday morning rain covered Madison in gray fog. At noon, I parked outside the airport terminal and watched planes disappear through the clouds. At 3:42 p.m., my phone buzzed. Flight landed. My heart began pounding. Somewhere inside that airport, Stephen Mercer still believed he had won. He had no idea his entire world was about to collapse the second he tried to buy a cup of coffee. Rain hammered against the roof of my car while I sat in the airport parking garage, staring at the arrivals terminal. My hands rested calmly on the steering wheel. That surprised me. A month ago, I would have been crying, panicking, shaking. Now I felt cold, focused, like an engineer studying a structure moments before demolition. At 4:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. A fraud alert notification. Transaction declined. Starbucks, Dane County International Airport. I stared at the screen. Then another alert appeared. Transaction declined. Terminal parking services. And another. Transaction declined. Luxury retail duty-free. I leaned back slowly in my seat. It had started. Inside the airport, Stephen Mercer was discovering that every account connected to his name had just been frozen. Every credit card, every checking account, every business account, gone. For the first time in his life, he had lost control. My phone rang immediately. Stephen. I let it ring. Then my mother called. I ignored that too. The rain grew heavier outside. 10 minutes later, I finally saw them emerge through the sliding terminal doors. Stephen walked first, still arrogant, still overdressed, still carrying himself like he owned the world. But something had changed. Panic. I could see it in the sharp movements of his shoulders. My mother hurried behind him, dragging 2 expensive suitcases through puddles. She looked exhausted and confused. Stephen kept pulling out his wallet. Cards. More cards. His phone. Nothing worked. I watched him try to order an Uber 3 separate times before slamming his phone against his leg in frustration. My mother grabbed his arm. Even from this distance, I could tell they were arguing. Then Stephen stopped suddenly and looked around the terminal entrance like a trapped animal searching for an escape route. My phone rang again. This time, I answered. "Claire!" my mother cried immediately. "Something's wrong with the bank accounts." I said nothing. "None of the cards are working," she continued frantically. "Stephen says the bank froze everything." Stephen grabbed the phone from her. "What did you do?" he barked. There he was, the real Stephen, not charming, not confident, just angry. "I haven't done anything," I said calmly. "You little bitch," he hissed. "You think this is funny?" I looked through the windshield at him standing in the rain, wearing a designer coat bought with my stolen money. "No," I said quietly. "I think this is accountability." For a second, there was silence. Then his voice changed, cold, threatening. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Actually, I did. I knew exactly who he was now. A fraud, a thief, a coward. And apparently, so did the state of Wisconsin, because at that exact moment, 3 police cruisers turned into the pickup lane with flashing lights cutting through the rain. Stephen saw them immediately. So did my mother. Her face went completely white. The cruisers stopped directly in front of them. Doors opened. Detective Aaron Hayes stepped out first. Even from a distance, his posture radiated authority. Stephen straightened instantly, trying to recover his confidence. I could practically predict his next move before it happened. Charm first. Intimidation second. He pointed aggressively at Hayes while speaking fast, probably explaining there had been some misunderstanding, probably mentioning lawyers, money, connections. Hayes didn't care. 2 officers moved beside Stephen immediately. My pulse stayed strangely steady as I watched Hayes pull paperwork from his jacket. An arrest warrant. Stephen's body language changed the second he realized this was real. He stepped backward. That was the mistake. One officer grabbed his arm. Stephen jerked away violently. Within seconds, both officers forced him against the hood of the police cruiser. My mother screamed. People nearby stopped walking. Phones appeared instantly. Someone started recording. Stephen shouted something I couldn't hear over the rain. Then came the handcuffs, cold metal around his wrists. For the first time in 10 years, Stephen Mercer looked small, not powerful, not superior, not untouchable, just scared. The officers shoved him into the back of the cruiser, while my mother sobbed hysterically beside the luggage. My phone rang again. "Mom," I answered slowly. "Claire," she cried, "they arrested him." "I know." "You knew this was happening?" "Yes." A terrible silence followed. Then her voice cracked. "How could you do this to us?" Us. Even now, she still chose his side first. "He forged my signature," I said calmly. "He stole nearly $500,000 from me. He was going to fix it." "No," I replied. "He was going to run." My mother began crying harder. "We don't have any money," she whispered desperately. "The accounts are frozen. We can't even get a hotel." I closed my eyes briefly. A month ago, I would have rescued her immediately, paid for everything, fixed everything. Not anymore. "You should call a taxi," I said quietly. "We can't afford one." The irony almost destroyed me. For years, Stephen mocked my careful budgeting, my mortgage payments, my practical lifestyle. Now they couldn't even afford a cab. "Claire, please come get me," my mother begged. I looked through the windshield one last time. Stephen sat handcuffed in the back of the police car, screaming at the officers. Rainwater streamed down the windows beside him. I felt no joy, only clarity. "You left me homeless," I said softly. "Now you know how it feels." Then I hung up. and drove away while the police lights flashed behind me in the storm. The news broke before midnight. Local businessman arrested in major real estate fraud investigation. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, watching Stephen's face appear across every local news station in Madison. One photo showed his polished LinkedIn profile picture. Perfect smile. Perfect suit. Perfect fake life. Then the footage switched to cell phone video from the airport. Rain pouring down. Police lights flashing. Stephen struggling against officers while screaming. The contrast was brutal. For years, he built his identity around appearances. Now the entire city watched that illusion collapse in real time. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I just felt tired, deeply tired. My phone exploded with notifications. Coworkers, neighbors, old classmates. Everyone suddenly wanted details. I ignored them all. The next morning, Ethan called before sunrise. "We're filing emergency motions today," he said immediately. "What happens now?" "We overturn the sale." Hope flickered painfully inside my chest. "Can we actually do that?" "Yes," Ethan said firmly. "The deed transfer was fraudulent. Legally, the sale is void from the beginning." For the first time in weeks, I could breathe a little easier. But reclaiming the house turned into another nightmare entirely. The family who bought it had already started moving in, a young couple with a baby. When I met them during the court proceedings, guilt nearly crushed me. The woman held her daughter while crying quietly in the courthouse hallway. "We didn't know," she whispered. "We thought everything was legitimate." "I know," I said softly, and I did know. They were victims too. Stephen had stolen from all of us. Thankfully, their title insurance company stepped in quickly, but the process was still devastating for them. Everywhere Stephen touched, destruction followed. 3 days later, I attended Stephen's arraignment hearing. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to avoid seeing him completely, but another part needed closure. The courtroom felt cold and colorless. My mother sat in the front row, wearing the same wrinkled coat from the airport. She looked 20 years older. Then Stephen entered, wearing an orange jail uniform. I barely recognized him. Without the expensive suits and polished confidence, he looked smaller somehow, fragile. Gray hair showed near his temples. Dark circles hung under his eyes. He scanned the courtroom until he saw me. Our eyes locked instantly. For years, Stephen looked at me with superiority, mockery, control. Now he looked terrified. Good. The judge reviewed the charges slowly. Wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, financial fraud, tax violations. The list seemed endless. Then the prosecutor presented evidence of offshore banking activity and attempted asset concealment. Stephen's attorney argued for bail. Detective Hayes immediately objected. "Your Honor," he said firmly, "the defendant possesses both the financial knowledge and international connections necessary to flee prosecution." He gestured toward the evidence files. He already attempted to liquidate stolen assets overseas. The judge looked unimpressed. Bail denied. Stephen's face went white. My mother started crying immediately. Meanwhile, I felt something strange loosen inside my chest. Not happiness. Relief. For the first time since this nightmare began, Stephen couldn't hurt me anymore. After the hearing, my mother appeared at the motel unexpectedly. When I opened the door, she looked exhausted. No makeup. Cheap clothes, swollen eyes. She suddenly resembled the woman I remembered before Stephen entered our lives. Tired, worn down, small. "Claire," she whispered. I stepped aside silently and let her enter. She looked around the motel room with visible shame. "I filed for divorce," she said quietly. I leaned against the dresser. "Okay." Tears filled her eyes immediately. "I didn't know he forged your signature." I said nothing. "He told me you agreed," she continued desperately. He said you wanted to sell the house. And you believed him? She looked down. I wanted to believe him. That answer hurt more than I expected because it was honest. She chose comfort over truth, money over me. He promised me security, she whispered. I folded my arms tightly. So you sacrificed your daughter for it. My mother cried openly then. I'm sorry. The words echoed through the tiny motel room. For years, I imagined hearing that apology. But now that it finally arrived, it changed nothing. Trust doesn't heal instantly. Some betrayals leave permanent fractures. My mother wiped her eyes carefully. I'm staying with my sister right now, she said quietly. Everything's frozen. I don't even have access to my own accounts. I nodded once. Then came the question I knew was coming. When you get the house back, she hesitated. Could I stay with you a while? Silence filled the room. The old version of me would have agreed immediately. The girl trained to fix everyone's problems. The girl terrified of disappointing her mother. But that girl no longer existed. I looked directly into her tear-filled eyes. No. She stared at me in shock. Claire. You chose him, I said calmly. You watched him destroy my life, and you boarded a plane anyway. I said I was sorry, and I believe you are sorry, I replied quietly. But that doesn't erase what happened. She started crying harder. You're all I have left. I swallowed painfully. And I was supposed to be your daughter. The room went silent again. Finally, my mother nodded weakly. She understood. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. When she left, I locked the motel door behind her and stood there breathing slowly in the silence. It hurt. God, it hurt. But for the first time in my life, I had chosen myself over guilt. 2 weeks later, I got my house back. Legally, anyway. The judge officially voided the fraudulent sale, and the title returned to my name. Ethan called me the moment the paperwork cleared. It's yours again, he said. I drove there immediately. The sold sign was gone. The lawn was overgrown from weeks of neglect, and dirt streaked the siding from heavy rainstorms. The flower beds looked dead. The porch swing creaked softly in the wind, but it was still my house. Or at least it used to be. I stood on the front porch for nearly a full minute before unlocking the door. My key fit perfectly. The click of the lock almost made me cry. I pushed the door open slowly. Silence. No furniture. No pictures. No warmth. Most of my belongings still sat in storage while the investigation continued. The empty rooms echoed when I walked through them. I stepped into the living room and looked around. This was where Stephen packed my books into boxes, where he told me I was selfish, where he smiled while destroying my life. The memories clung to the walls like smoke. I sat down on the hardwood floor and stared at the ceiling. For years, this house represented safety. Now, it represented survival. There's a difference. 3 months later, Stephen accepted a plea deal. 8 years in federal prison for wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, and financial fraud. Walter attended the sentencing hearing. I didn't. I didn't need to see Stephen cry in a courtroom to know he finally lost. The state seized nearly everything he owned. Cars, accounts, luxury purchases, remaining investments. Restitution payments slowly returned part of my stolen equity over time. As for my mother, she got a job answering phones at a dental office outside Madison. We spoke occasionally, short conversations. Careful conversations. She apologized often, and I believed she meant it. But trust is like cracked concrete. You can repair it. You can reinforce it. But the fracture lines never completely disappear. One evening, about 6 months after the trial, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the walls. I realized something important. I didn't want the house anymore. Not because Stephen won, because he poisoned it. Every room carried ghosts now. So I sold it on my terms. I hired my own realtor, negotiated my own price, signed every paper personally, and when the money cleared into my account, I felt something I hadn't felt in over a year. Peace. A month later, I bought 10 acres of land outside Madison. No nearby neighbors, no noise, just oak trees, open sky, and a narrow creek running across the back property line. Then I designed a new house from scratch. That part almost made me laugh. Stephen spent years mocking my engineering career. In the end, engineering was exactly what saved me. I designed reinforced foundations, steel support framing, impact-resistant windows. Not because I was afraid, because I understood strength now. Real strength isn't loud like Stephen. It doesn't scream. It doesn't dominate. Real strength is quiet, stable, built carefully over time. I helped pour the foundation myself. Every bag of concrete felt symbolic somehow. This house wasn't inherited, wasn't stolen, wasn't given. I built it. About a year after everything happened, I met someone, Nathan Brooks, a landscape architect with kind eyes and dirt permanently trapped under his fingernails. He never tried to impress me, never talked down to me, never treated my independence like a threat. The first time he visited the new house, we sat on the back porch watching the sunset spill gold across the trees. Nathan studied the thick stone walls for a long moment. "You built a fortress," he said softly. I smiled into my coffee cup. "No," I corrected him. "I built a home, and for the first time in a very long time, I finally believed it."